Hello, I'm Alex Benson.
And I'm Jared Weiss, and we are Ethereal Sunrise.
Well, Ethereal Sunrise is a rock and roll musical project between Jared and myself um, that was sort of brewing for a number of years. Jared and I had met in school and kind of bonded over some shared musical interests and musical heroes, particularly like Steve Howe of Yes and some other uh, giants of the progressive rock era. And throughout school, we had a variety of musical projects, some together, some separate, some with other people. And there was just sort of this kernel of an idea that we had of maybe trying to actually write an album together and to have a project that was entirely consistent of our original music. And that's where the Ethereal Sunrise project developed, as well as this album, Steady as Rock.
So I started playing guitar when I was 6 years old. My younger brother and I started playing at the same time. It wasn't that hard to convince me to do this. My dad, who's a huge fan of classic rock, jazz, blues, the works, and had read somewhere that good thing for young kids in hand-eye coordination is to play an instrument. Said, "Hey, you like Jerry Garcia, right? You like Jimi Hendrix, Clapton, the works. You wanna be like them?" And I was like, yes, because I was six, and that's what was cool when you were six, and it's even cooler now. Um, so I've been playing since the age of six. Probably started writing music, I don't know, a couple years later, and though never formally trained in any kind of vocals, did start singing and writing lyrics around the same time. A couple years later, also started picking up the bass so that I could write full arrangements for songs. Um, and that kind of got us to where we were when we started working together, Alex and me. Clapton was and probably still is my favorite guitarist, but I love all the great classic rock guitarists. I've always had an appreciation for Yes and ELP and Pink Floyd and Genesis. I think Alex turned me on to things like King Crimson to a greater extent, um, Deep Purple to a greater extent, groups that had a pretty significant influence on this project. So I think that's about it for me. Alex?
Yeah, so actually pretty similar story in a lot of respects. I also started playing guitar around 5 or 6. I grew up in a musical household. So I played in a band with my older brothers growing up. And my father was primarily a jazz musician, so there was a lot of that influence that was going on as well. So played a lot of jazz growing up, Charlie Parker and Wes Montgomery and all those sorts of folks. But definitely the person who it's kind of inspired me to pick up the guitar was Jimi Hendrix, as I think it is for many of us. And then it sort of moved from Hendrix to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and then ultimately hitting upon a lot of some of the progressive rock guitarists like Steve Howe and Robert Fripp, and also the kind of jazz fusion guitarists, sort of Al Di Meolas and John McLaughlin's and all of that sort of era. So those were a lot of the influences I had. But I also, in addition to sort of liking the sort of arty, kind of out there rock, I also really liked the kind of immediate and sort of bombastic rock from all the 70s and 80s bands, Toto and Asia and all those sorts of artists that I think I tried to sort of synthesize all of those influences into how I approached writing. And I also started writing around the same age that Jared had been, around 10 or so, and wrote some things and then had a gap and then came back to it a little bit older. And yeah, that's kind of how things came together for me.
So it was fall 2016 sometime when Alex and I sort of decided we wanted to try writing a song together. and we weren't 100% sure where to start, but I had a couple of ideas I'd been playing around with. So I said, let me show them to you, see what you think. And there was one, let me grab my guitar real quick. So there was one that was based on kind of this harmonic pattern. It was kind of, I wouldn't say it was slow, but it was kind of this moderate paced groove sort of thing. Something like, my bad. Something like that. That seemed to, despite not being a chordal pattern per se, strike a chord with Alex, who thought that was something we could work with.
And I remembered when we were trying to get started, it was Jared who had sort of brought in a bunch of different kind of riffs and musical motifs to use, and that was kind of the one that had stuck out to me. And so as we started to try to figure out, well, where do we sort of go with this? We used that as the kind of starting point. But my goal was to sort of get to a point for writing a song that was sort of really rocking out. And they were cool musical ideas, but they weren't quite yet at that point where they were rocking out. So right. I, in my endless wisdom, decided to take it in a different direction and say, well, what if we sort of do all those flourishes, and then it leads into sort of more of a classic rock type of and get that basic riff just to sort of transition the song into something that was a little bit more up tempo and a little bit more aggressive. And so that was sort of the starting point of all of this, of these two kind of contrasting motifs that we then started to play around with. How do we want to sort of arrange all these things and how we want to develop them? And so ultimately we settled on that riff that I just played was going to be the sort of big bombastic opening. And then we kind of separated Jared's riffs into sort of the kind of verse motif and then sort of a post-chorus motif that we were going to use later. And then it's sort of started to become, well, what do we do with the rest of the song? And so I feel like, if I'm recalling correctly, a lot of the development of the verse and of the chorus were really just playing around with chords and chord progressions and being like, oh, I like that chord change, and oh, that's a cool chord change.
Right.
Yeah, and then I think in terms of the melodies, that was a lot of like, once we had some basic chord patterns that we were happy with, I think Jared in particular on the verse, and I think me on the chorus, started to just sort of ad-lib kind of vocal lines and vocal melodies to try to catch on to something that was sort of interesting, and that each of us would be like, oh, that I like that. Let's try to do that again. Then of course we wanted to bring a little bit of that progressive rock influence, a little bit of that kind of weirdness into it. And so that's where some of the solo ideas came from. In particular, throwing a flute solo into the middle of that, a very kind of Jethro Tull type move that just really, it grabs your attention because it's such a guitar influenced song, to just sort of have that abrupt transition into a different lead instrument. And then, of course, the next homage was sort of more in the kind of Boston-like territory of having, the dual melodic lead guitars, which I think Jared largely was responsible for the actual composition of.
Right. I mean, I think we knew, because this was the first song we were writing together, and us both being guitarists, that it would be nice if we did like a dual guitar, harmonized guitar solo somewhere in there. Somehow it ended up in a totally different key, A flat major instead of the E minor the rest of the song was in. I know you were responsible for bridging that transition. I, for the life of me, can't remember why I decided it needed to be in a totally different key, but
I don't know that. I feel like we decided to go to that key, and then we decided to write a solo in that key. there was something about just having some sort of chromatic walk up and just be like, well, let's take it to somewhere completely different than we've been for the
Right.
last, few minutes. And it does definitely sort of give it that, it's kind of a refreshing change when it then goes to that section because it just sounds completely different.
Right. I mean, if there are two things we like, it's bombast and chromatics. So it was,
Yeah.
I think, important that both found their way into the song somehow. So the lyrics were the last part of the song to be written. Alex and I have both written lyrics for our own material, but I don't think either of us had a clear sense of what we wanted this song to be about lyrically. Somehow I ended up becoming responsible for the lyrics, I assume through some clever manipulations on Alex's part. And he wisely advised that for this kind of pump up, upbeat, rock and roll song that was going to kick off the album, and though we didn't know it at the time, become the single, that it really should be kind of like this anthemic lyric, very inspiring, whatever. So I kind of took that and ran with it. Oddly enough, it's the sort of lyric Alex would typically write more so than the lyric I would typically write. So it was fun to almost do an Alex impersonation. There was no specific context in mind. I think in some respects it is a fitting song for our times. The harbingers of fear and lies line comes to mind. But really, it's just a pump up anthem.
Yeah, I mean, Jared is known for writing very kind of more sensitive story type songs, and thought it would be very amusing to sort of make him go out of his comfort zone, but also use the fact that he's basically a better lyricist than I am to add a little bit of flair to this song. And it worked out pretty well.
So Rule of the Night is available now actually on our Bandcamp page, which is linked in the description of the video. So you can go check it out over there right now. It will also be the lead-off song on the album Steady as Rock, which will be released on November 20th, 2020 on all major music streaming and download platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube, you name it. It will be available, I think, on some of those platforms for pre-order on November 13th, a week beforehand. We're really excited for you all to check it out. It's been a ton of fun working on this project together. We put together 50 plus minutes of music we're very happy with, and we hope you will be too.
We hope that you're able to enjoy the journey along with us.
Feel free to follow us on social media. Again, the accounts are in the video descriptions. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a SoundCloud. We have this YouTube channel, so please subscribe. There will be further updates with more goodies related to the album as we get closer to release and beyond. So we hope to see you in more videos.
All right. Bye.